Welcome to the Port Huron Statement. Today we're talking about John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, murdered 33 young men and boys. He buried most of them in the crawl space beneath his house. He was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, and the official story is that he acted alone, although he says otherwise. He claims it was a network. He named names. He named organizations. He described how the system protected him and others like him. For years, researchers have traced the connections between Gacy and a Chicago-based child trafficking network run by a man named John Norman. And then there's Phillip Paske, a man who worked for Gacy and was Norman's closest associate.
There may have been others involved in some of those murders. Gacy always said he didn't kill all the boys, and he alluded to the idea that there could have been a bigger picture, that there may have been a snuff film operation, and that some of these young men and boys were being killed and videotaped.
In 2025, Peacock released a documentary called Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. The same year, Netflix's Conversations of a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, was already streaming. Both documentaries claimed to tell the definitive story. Both failed to mention the network. Both reinforced the lone wolf narrative, and both were released with timing that suggests they were designed to preempt exactly what we're discussing here. The episode is about that network. It's about how Gacy wasn't a lone wolf.
When he first said that to me, I was thinking, this sounds like a bunch of BS. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, Gacy liked to make money. There were probably other people involved in these crimes. There was probably a black market for snuff films back then, if you like that kind of stuff, so maybe that did make sense.
It's about how the same pattern we've been documenting, institutional protection, destroyed evidence, and jurisdictional confusion, appears again and again. It's about how John Wayne Gacy himself from prison tried to tell the world that he was part of something much bigger. This is the story of how a clown became a confession, and how the system tried to bury that confession with documentary after documentary, news report after news report, trying to push the story into that of a lone wolf serial killer.
The thing of it is, they want you to believe that I and I alone committed these murders.
If anybody was involved, then how many people are we talking about beside yourself?
We believe there was 4 people involved. Mm-hmm. And that would be Michael Rossi, David Cram, Phillip Paske.
John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago. He grew up in a household dominated by an alcoholic, abusive father. He struggled with his identity, he was bullied, and he was beaten. By the 1970s, Gacy had built a life for himself. He was a successful businessman, a building contractor. He was active in the Democratic Party. He was a member of the JCs. He was married, he was respected, and he was killing young men and boys. Gacy's crimes came to light in 1978. The bodies of his victims were buried in the crawl space beneath his house. He eventually confessed to 33 murders, more than any other serial killer in American history at that time. But Gacy didn't just confess, he talked, and what he said didn't fit the lone wolf narrative. In interviews from prison, Gacy repeatedly claimed he wasn't acting alone. He said there were others involved. He named names. In an exclusive 1992 interview with CBS Chicago's Walter Jacobson, Gacy said, "The media has always contended there was others involved. At the time of my arrest, there were 4 other suspects. 3 of them worked for his construction company. He also said his associates were involved directly in the murders." He named employees from his construction company, Michael Rossi, David Cram, and Phillip Paske, all of whom he said had keys to his house. In one recorded conversation, Rossi was called on a police wiretap, saying to Gacy, "And what? Buried like the other 5." Gacy also claimed that his victims were part of a larger network, a prostitution and trafficking ring that operated out of Chicago. He claimed he was given victims by other members of this network. He claimed that some of his victims were killed by others. But the media didn't want to believe him. The police didn't want to investigate. The lone wolf narrative was more convenient. But Gacy's claims were not isolated. They connected to something much larger. John Norman was the head of a nationwide child trafficking network based in Chicago. He called it the Delta Project. He also called it the Odyssey Foundation. These names are important because they're going to come back as we finally get to contemporary operations. So keep them in mind. It was a sophisticated operation with thousands of clients across the United States. When police raided Norman's home in Texas in 1973, they found an index card system containing the names of thousands of clients. The cards recorded the clients' names, addresses, and specific preferences, as well as other little factoids. The exact number varies by source. Some reports say 30,000, others say as many as 100,000 cards. Norman was described by a Dallas police detective named R.C. Nelson as the pedophile of pedophiles, a man who advertised kids for rent before sending adolescents around the country to be prostituted. His operation was called the Odyssey Foundation. And this becomes significant because this name is used subsequently. Norman had sexual and economic ties to prominent members of the Chicago businesses and business community. He was protected by the system. He operated with de facto impunity. Norman was a master of institutional capture. He understood how to use police, politicians, and professionals to protect himself and to protect his network.
One time that I can remember, the reason I say that is I got around this guy and he drugged me a lot. So I don't know if it was more than once, but his name was Joe Ramos. He was a teacher from Chicago. And I met him on the run, but I also met him in Chicago. He ran a group of kids and stuff for another guy who got busted, who had a pink file, had a fake file with all the guys' names and stuff. Minus, of course, well actually I don't know if it was minus their names or not, but nobody's ever came out with the fact that Alan Zvere's name was in it, Harold Harris' name was in it. In fact,
Where did this file come from?
it was a file this guy had kept. He got arrested, not Joe Ramos, because he's never been arrested. He was a teacher. That's how he got most kids for his business, because they prostituted kids out. And he was the one that recruited a lot of kids. He's never been arrested, as far as I know. Never been found out about. But
Why would you make a file of the perpetrator?
well, because they were all over the country and stuff, and the reason was is he had on his file cards, he had what type of kids this person liked. And these people would call him and they would order kids from their own areas, and these guys would have kids from, I was a kid from Omaha and I helped supply them with other kids that were my age and stuff to do things for me here in Omaha. And also in Chicago and New York.
So this guy was Chicago?
Yeah,
He had pictures of the perpetrators?
No, he had file cards. Joe Ramos didn't have them. The other guy had them. The other guy got arrested. They found this file card thing. But of course, the FBI, I believe, is the one that arrested them, so it's any of the files that they didn't want to become public would have probably disappeared.
Norman's index cards were turned over to the State Department. The State Department later claimed the cards had been destroyed in 1974 because they could find no use for them. Senate hearing records show the stated reason for destruction was that no passport fraud could be found. This is weird. I've looked into this, and I haven't looked into it super deep, but it's just, this evidence destruction pattern is really glaring. Think about that. The State Department, not the FBI, not the local police, destroyed evidence of a nationwide child trafficking network under the pretext of no immigration crime, or maybe it's national security, because we know there are a lot of CIA implicated, because John Norman was implicated in Troop 137, which involved CIA agents caught red-handed. So the link between Gacy and Norman is Phillip Paske.
Phillip Paske was from Chicago. He, he was one of those people who got into trouble, did a little drugs, did a little of this. And somehow John Norman came into his life.
So the story goes like this. There's a guy named John Norman. Norman does some jail time for assaulting some kids in Homewood, Illinois. While he's in the Cook County Jail, using the jail printing press, he creates this newsletter, the Delta Project, this sex trafficking ring that's going to men who want to have sex with boys.
And while he was in Cook County Jail, he met Phillip Paske. And when he got out of jail, Cook County Jail, Paske took over the operation of Norman's operation.
Here we've got a Phillip Paske who had a newsletter going on at the Cook County Jail. And here he is involved with a guy named John Norman. And John Norman was running Boys for Hire. They were making snuff films with young boys.
John Wayne Gacy isn't the only serial killer that ends up directly part of this network. Dean Corll, the Candyman of Houston, Texas, murdered at least 28 young boys and teenagers between 1970 and 1973. He buried most of them in a boat shed. Sound familiar? He was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history at that time, just like Gacy. And he also said he was part of a network. In 1971, Corll recruited a 14-year-old accomplice named Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. Corll offered Henley $200 for every boy he could lure to his apartment. He told Henley something that changed everything. And it really confirms the hypothesis. Corll told Henley he was involved in a white slavery ring operating out of Dallas. He told Henley the victims were being sold into a slavery network. Henley believed the boys he helped abduct were being trafficked, not murdered.
I went to Fort Worth this afternoon and talked with the mother of a 16-year-old runaway boy missing since January 5th of this year.
About a month ago, I heard through the grapevine, the kid told my other one that Timmy had gone down towards Houston.
And what are your thoughts after hearing that?
I just hope he's not down there. If he's any place to be found, please call home.
What have police been doing to locate the boy?
Nothing. I tell them, and they say they've seen out bulletins, and that's all they can do.
So the pain and grief mounts with parents like Mrs. Huron with every new revelation in the Houston case. Police in both Dallas and Fort Worth report an increase in the number of calls, both reporting and inquiring about runaways since the Houston slangs made news last week.
Henley later told investigators how Corll recruited him and another accomplice, David Brooks, to find boys for a white slavery ring. The victims were to be sold into the network. But Corll apparently didn't sell them, or didn't sell all of them. He killed them, or some of them, and he used the threat of the network to control his accomplices, warning them that if they stepped out of line, the organization would hunt them and their families. That organization Corll described, it was John Norman's network exactly. John Norman was a convicted sex offender that we've been talking about that was connected to John Wayne Gacy. He's a critical node in this entire thing. His operations included, as we've mentioned before, the Odyssey Foundation, which was built in Texas, and he also had the Delta Project, which is important because Delta Project goes back to their obsession with triangles, and the NAMBLA symbology is really important to these people. On August 15th, 1973, just 2 days after Carroll's crimes came to light, Dallas police raided Norman's apartment, and what they found was staggering. And the connection to Gacy, Norman's closest associate, his number 2, was Phillip Paske, the same Phillip Paske who worked for John Wayne Gacy, the same Phillip Paske who linked Gacy to Norman's trafficking network. Carroll, Gacy, and Norman were not separate. They were connected nodes in the same criminal infrastructure, a network that used child sex trafficking as the foundation of a blackmail economy, and worse. The network protects itself, and it still does. Paske was John Norman's closest associate. So the fact that Gacy's construction employee and a person that had direct access to Gacy's house was also John Norman's number 2. At the same time, Paske worked for Gacy's company. So Norman concedes that Paske was direct associates. He was on the prosecution's witness list, though. In a 1992 prison interview, Gacy described Paske as dangerous and stated that he pimped girls, boys for sex, for movies, and for worse. This is not speculation. This is documented. Paske was both Norman's right-hand man and an employee of John Wayne Gacy. Gacy's first victim, Timothy McCoy, was from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Again, the first victim is coming from Michigan. This also occurs with Epstein, connecting Gacy directly to the local network and providing further confirmation of the sheer scale of this network. Several of Gacy's victims were last seen near Norman's home. Gacy himself claimed that Norman's network was involved in the abduction and trafficking of the boys he killed, all of them. The podcast The Clown and the Candyman explores this connection more deeply. It argues that Gacy, Dean, Corll, and Norman were all part of a larger network, a network that was protected by powerful figures in American society. I agree with this interpretation. I don't think that there's any other way to possibly look at this, and as the money filters down into the present day, and as these operations shift in their sort of the character and the mask they wear, it just becomes really obvious. I mean, this is really obviously a large, coordinated, multi-generational network. Now let's talk about the documentaries. In 2022, Netflix released Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes. It gives you the implication that it's going to reveal to you secrets previously unknown about John Wayne Gacy. It was described as a superficial look, however, at the infamous serial killer that was little more than a repackaging of the well-known and highly suspicious story. It used 60 hours of unearthed audio to reinforce the lone wolf narrative. It never mentioned the network. It intentionally censored out anything that was inconvenient to the established narrative, even though there is enormous documentation. And throughout years and years, he continued to say it was a network, but they just happened to avoid all of that. In October 2025, Peacock released Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Critics called it the light beer of true crime, sanitized and totally bland. It was praised for being victim-forward, but that focus allowed it to avoid the network entirely. Episode 5 did introduce John David Norman, but the series overall almost entirely avoids depicting the horrific kidnappings, rapes, tortures, beatings, and murders of Gacy, and also completely avoids approaching with any serious nature the network element, which is undoubtedly part of it. It at least should have gotten a serious examination. They don't want to actually do that because it's the only thing that makes sense. It was as inoffensive as anything about serial sexual assault and murder could possibly be. It was designed to be inconsequential. Notice the timing. A major documentary about Gacy released just as independent researchers were connecting his network to Norman, Paske, North Fox Island, and, as we'll see soon, to Epstein, to all of this stuff, Francis Duffield Children ends up directly connected to the Maxwell's. It's nuts. It's one network. The lone wolf narrative was being reinforced precisely as it was becoming more vulnerable. This is what we call first mention type strategies. When a damaging narrative is about to surface, the system releases a controlled narrative first. It establishes the official story before the alternative narrative can take hold. This is why Kiriakou is going around saying that yes, Epstein was a Mossad agent, but CIA was not involved. And it works. The public encounters the documentary first. They see the victim-focused storytelling. They hear the experts. They never hear about the network. They never hear about the index cards. They never hear about the State Department destroying the index cards. They never hear Gacy's own words about the other suspects and the greater network, and about the child sex trafficking ring that was supplying him with the children. The documentaries are not truth. They are containment strategies. Sound familiar? It should. The Norman Network and this whole thing is a regurgitation of the same tactics we've documented over and over again. Not only is the media ultimately suppressing the complicity of a much greater network, the crimes themselves by Gacy and Norman and Paske show the exact same pattern. Institutional protection. Norman was protected by police, politicians, and business leaders. Destroyed evidence. Norman's index cards were confiscated by authorities and later destroyed under national security claims, plus any evidence regarding Gacy and the network was completely suppressed during the trial and in the press. Jurisdictional confusion. The network moved across state lines, and so they compartmentalize investigations, and this happened again with Gacy, preventing a much earlier uncovering of the John Norman situation. Religious and charitable fronts. John Norman used the Odyssey Foundation as cover, which is, of course, creating a philanthropic veneer while preying on the very people that they're supposedly helping. Trauma-based control. Victims were drugged, abused, and trafficked, and then sometimes even blackmailed for having been engaged in this type of torture. It's very complex and disgusting. Clients were compromised through their own forced participation and recording of it. And we see this too, and we mentioned over and over again, I can do anything as long as I record it, because then they utilize it as blackmail material. Compromat. The same pattern we've seen with North Fox Island, with Troop 137, with the Cass Corridor, with the Delphi, with the Franklin scandal, with Epstein. The same pattern, the same institutions, the same protection. Gacy spent years trying to tell the world that he was part of a network. He wrote letters, he gave interviews, he named these names. He said the media has always contended there were others involved, and those others are known. Gacy is not a lone wolf. He's an example of a convenient boogeyman that's being utilized, and ultimately the lone wolf narrative protects the greater network. And then all of the murders, the convenient suppression of information that those murders allow, right? So if any kid could potentially identify one of their abusers, then they use Gacy to kill them. That's a containment apparatus. So by making him out to look like a lone wolf, you protect the entire rest of the rest of the operation. Containment. Like, it's disgusting. And that network is still operating. John Wayne Gacy killed 33 people and was executed in 1994. Again, the official narrative is still that he acted alone. But he said otherwise, and I say otherwise. He said it was a network, and I believe it's a network, and everyone that looks deeply into this authentically comes to the same conclusion. And when independent researchers started connecting these dots, what happened? 2 major documentaries were released, both reinforcing the lone wolf narrative. John Norman's network was not an isolated network. It was a node in this same greater network. It's still operating today, protected by the same institutions, using the same tactics and destroying the same evidence, deploying the same depravity, and even using a lot of the same names. The only thing that we can do at this point is to start exposing this for what it is. And then moving forward, we need to start taking action to tear it apart. So we're getting further along in the exposure element. People are becoming aware of the totality of this, because this is directly connected to Epstein. This is directly connected to current charity exploitation schemes that are going on right here in Michigan, but across the country. Right here in Port Huron. Even using the same names. It's really annoying. So we just need to refuse to let this continue. That there is really a path to undo the stranglehold of sexual blackmail on the authorities of this country. But we just have to not be afraid of a bunch of punk criminals. They're not smart, they're just depraved. And they intimidate people and they blackmail people. And then they use religion to shield themselves from consequences and philanthropy and technology and the badge authority. It's a lot, actually, money. It's a lot. But it's the world that they are imposing is hell on earth. So it can't be accepted.